The gay rookie nurse walked into my room and did this. It started as an ordinary evening in the hospital. The kind of night when the white walls and the sound of distant monitors made everything feel heavy and endless. I wasn't expecting anything out of the routine until the door to my room opened, and he walked in. He was new, I could tell right away, a little unsure in his movements, but there was something about the way his eyes lingered that made the air suddenly feel charged. His presence unsettled me, not because I felt uncomfortable, but because I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. I didn't know then how much that single encounter would change me. I didn't know that the rookie nurse, quiet, careful, yet undeniably magnetic, would push me to face the very feelings I tried to bury for years. What began with small gestures and hesitant smiles would soon lead me into moments of tension I couldn't have imagined, where desire clashed with fear, and where I had to choose whether to keep hiding or finally allow myself to feel. This isn't just a story about attraction. It's about discovering who I really was, about finding courage in the most unexpected place, and about the fine line between friendship and something much deeper. And every step of the way, I was torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what started as a simple hospital shift turned into something that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. If you've ever been caught between fear and desire, or wonder what might happen if you let go just once, this story will speak to you. Don't miss a single moment. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you can follow every twist of this journey. Because trust me, what he did that night, you won't forget it. The first night I met him was nothing extraordinary at first glance, yet would stay carved into my memory in a way that few moments ever had. I had been admitted for a minor but frustrating condition that kept me in the hospital longer than I wanted. My room was sterile, painted in off-white tones that felt cold and impersonal, and the hum of machines in the hall was a constant reminder of where I was. I had gotten used to the rhythm of nurses coming in and out, polite but distant, always moving quickly, never lingering longer than necessary. But that night, when the door creaked open, something shifted. He stepped in with a cautious air, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked younger than most of the staff I had seen, maybe mid-20s, with neatly kept dark hair, a sharp jaw softened by nerves, and eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around him. His navy blue scrubs looked almost too new, like he had just started wearing them. I could tell immediately that he was new here, and for some reason, that made me curious. "Mr. Harris?" he asked, his voice calm but with a trace of hesitation. "That's me," I replied, sitting up a little straighter. "Though I prefer Daniel, if that's okay." He nodded, making a note on the chart. "Daniel, then. I'm Evan. I'm on rotation tonight." Evan. The name fit him. Simple, but it lingered. He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile, the kind that made me wonder if he'd been told to look confident but hadn't quite mastered it yet. At first, our interaction was professional. He checked my vitals, adjusted the 4-line, and asked the usual questions. But it wasn't what he did that caught my attention. It was how he did it. He didn't rush. His movements were careful, deliberate, and every time he looked at me, I felt like his gaze lingered a second too long. "First week?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Second," he admitted, almost sheepishly. "Still learning my way around. You could probably walk me through the routine at this point." I chuckled. "Maybe. I've seen enough nurses in and out of here to know the script." He laughed softly at that, and it was the first time I saw his shoulders relax. Something about that sound stuck with me. It wasn't forced, it was genuine, and it made me want to hear it again. As he finished writing on the chart, he glanced up. "Anything you need before I move on?" I should have said no. That was the normal response, the expected one. But instead, I hesitated. "Maybe some company?" The word slipped out before I could stop myself. I expected him to politely excuse himself, but instead, he paused. His lips curved into that small, careful smile again. "I shouldn't, but I've got a few minutes before I check on the next patient," he said quietly, as if sharing a secret. And just like that, he pulled up the chair beside my bed and sat down. It wasn't much, just sitting there, chatting, but the way he listened made it feel like more. He asked where I was from, what I did, and I found myself telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone here. He wasn't just filling time. He seemed genuinely interested. The more he asked, the more I noticed the way his eyes would brighten when I said something that caught him off guard, or the way his hand tapped lightly against the clipboard when he was thinking of what to say next. At one point, there was a pause, a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy. His gaze dropped, lingering on my hands resting on the blanket, and for a second, I swore he wanted to reach out, but he didn't. He cleared his throat and stood up quickly, almost as if he had caught himself. I should get back, but I'll check in on you later. Looking forward to it, I said before I could think better of it. That night, after he left, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The way his smile had lingered, the way his presence seemed to change the room. I told myself not to overthink it. He was just being kind, maybe too kind, but still just a nurse doing his job. And yet, when he came back at the end of his shift, something about the way he gently adjusted my blanket, making sure I was comfortable, made my chest tighten. "Get some rest, Daniel," he said softly, almost in a tone that felt too personal for the sterile walls around us. The door closed behind him, and I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Was it just my imagination, or was there something in the way he said my name that meant more than it should? The next day, I told myself I was being foolish. But when the evening came again, I found myself waiting, not for the routine rounds, not for medication, but for him, for Evan, for that hesitant smile that felt like it carried a secret. And when the door finally opened and it was him again, my pulse quickened in a way I couldn't control. He walked in carrying the same clipboard, but this time, he didn't just look like the new nurse on rotation. He looked like someone who had started to take up space in my thoughts in a way I wasn't ready to admit. That night, he lingered a little longer again. He asked if I was sleeping better, if I needed anything. But before I could answer, something happened. The lights flickered. The hum of machines in the hallway stuttered and then fell silent. A power outage. The hospital plunged into an eerie half-darkness, lit only by the dim emergency lights. I could hear voices in the hall, nurses scrambling, patients calling out. Evan froze in my doorway, caught between duty and something else. He glanced at me, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity one hadn't seen before. For a moment, it felt like we were suspended in the dark, cut off from everything else. "Stay here," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "I'll come back." And then he was gone, leaving me in the dim light, my heart racing, not just from the blackout, but from the thought that when he came back, something between us might change forever. The darkness inside the hospital felt different from any darkness I had ever known. It wasn't complete. The dim red emergency lights glowed faintly along the hallways, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. But for a place so full of constant beeps, chatter, and movement, the sudden silence was unnerving. I sat there on my bed, staring at the door Evan had just disappeared through. My chest rose and fell faster than it should. Part of me wanted to be calm, to remind myself this was just a power outage, something hospitals are prepared for. But another part of me was restless, tuned to the memory of the way Evan had looked at me before he left. His voice, steady but low, still echoed in my head. "I'll come back." Minutes dragged on, though they felt like hours. I could hear footsteps rushing in the hall, muffled voices giving directions, the metallic rattle of carts being moved. At one point, someone down the corridor called out in frustration, then fell silent again. I clenched the blanket in my hands, forcing myself to stay patient. And then, finally, I heard his footsteps. Not hurried, but measured, like he was trying to steady himself. The door creaked open, and Evan stepped inside, his face faintly illuminated by the emergency glow. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than before. I nodded. "Yeah, just feels strange in here." He exhaled, leaning lightly against the wall, as if even he needed a moment to catch his breath. Backup generators should kick in soon, but until then, it's a mess out there. There was a brief silence. His eyes drifted to me, lingering longer than they should have. Something about being in a half-light, with the world outside my room in chaos, made the space between us feel different, more intimate. I gestured toward the chair. You want to sit? Looks like you could use a break. He hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. Then, almost reluctantly, he closed the door partway and lowered himself into the chair beside my bed. You ever notice how quiet everything feels when the power's out? He said after a moment, like the whole building is holding its breath. I tilted my head, studying him. You sound like you've thought about this before. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Maybe I just noticed things too much. That was something I had already realized about him. The way he noticed, not just the machines or the charts, but the small things. The way I tapped my fingers against the bed rail. When I was anxious. The way my gaze shifted toward the window. Whenever I was restless. He caught details others overlooked, and it made me feel seen. For a few minutes, we just sat there. I told him about how restless I felt being stuck in bed, how the hours dragged on. He admitted he had been nervous all week, feeling like he didn't belong, like everyone else was watching him to see if he'd fail. I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, and it struck me how rare it was for someone to open up like that so quickly. You don't seem like you're failing, I told him. He gave a quiet laugh. That's because you're not watching me when I'm trying to figure out which cabinet has the supplies I need. You'll learn, I said, smiling. Everyone starts somewhere. He looked at me then, really looked, the kind of gaze that holds you in place, makes your throat go dry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with something I couldn't name. Then, suddenly, a crash echoed from the hallway, making us both jump. He stood quickly, his professional instincts kicking back in. I should check on that, he said, already moving toward the door. But before he stepped out, he paused, turning back toward me. His expression was unreadable, conflicted. Daniel. His voice was low, uncertain. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, then shook his head. I'll be back. And just like that, he was gone again. The next morning, the hospital buzzed back to life, brighter and noisier than ever. The outage was over. The machines beeped again. The staff moved quickly through the halls. But I carried the memory of that night with me. The way he had looked at me in the dark. The way my name had sounded on his lips, like he was about to confess something and then stopped himself. Later that day, he returned for rounds. His demeanor was more controlled now, the nervous rookie mask firmly back in place. But when our eyes met, I caught something, a flicker of recognition, like we were sharing a secret no one else knew. How are you feeling today? He asked, adjusting the foreline. Better, I said, but tired. He nodded, his hands steady as he worked. But then he did something unexpected. He sat down again, just for a minute, when he didn't have to. You ever think about how fast things change? He asked suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He shrugged, staring at his hands. One moment everything feels normal, and then something happens, and you can't look at it the same way again. The weight of his words hung in the air. My pulse quickened, but before I could respond, a knock came at the door. Another nurse peeked in, calling him to assist with another patient. Evan stood, smoothing the front of his scrubs. I'll come back later, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes still carrying that strange intensity. The hours crawled by, and when he finally returned that evening, the room felt charged again. We talked about small things at first, his training, my work outside the hospital. But then, in a quiet moment, I asked a question that had been circling my mind. Evan, last night, before you left, you started to say something. What was it? He froze, caught off guard. For a long moment, he didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the floor. Finally, he said, almost too quietly to hear, Daniel, I think I like being here more than I should. My heart skipped. I wasn't sure if I had heard him correctly, or if he even meant it the way it sounded. Before I could respond, he stood quickly, almost flustered. I should finish my rounds, he said, his voice rushed. And just like that, he left me with 100 questions burning inside me. Did he mean he liked his job? Or did he mean something else? Something about me? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. I think I like being here more than I should. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that whatever he meant, my life inside the sterile hospital room was no longer the same. I couldn't shake the sentence Evan had left behind. I think I like being here more than I should. It echoed in my head all morning, long after the routine of nurses and the smell of antiseptic filled the hallways. I kept wondering if he had meant the job or me. By noon, the physical therapist arrived to drag me into the hall for laps. My body was sore, but my mind was somewhere else. Halfway down the corridor, I saw him. Evan stood behind the nurse's station, scanning a chart, hair slightly mussed as if he'd run his hand through it a dozen times. He looked up at me, and for a second our eyes locked. It wasn't a smile, but it was something softer, like a flicker of recognition only I was meant to notice. The therapist stopped to answer a question from a colleague, leaving me parked in the middle of the hallway with my 4-pole. Evan took the chance, walking over with a small roll of tape in hand. "Your line's slipping," he said. His voice was casual, but the warmth in his eyes wasn't. He leaned close to secure the tape, his fingers brushing my wrist. It was nothing practical, routine, but it carried a spark that set my pulse racing. He looked up briefly, as if checking whether I noticed, then stepped back just before the therapist returned. Back in my room later, I was still replaying the moment when Evan slipped inside quietly, closing the door most of the way. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling the chair close. "Better when you're around," I admitted before I could stop myself. His eyes lingered on mine. "Daniel," he began, then paused, running a hand down his thigh nervously. "I told you I didn't want to lie by omission." "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He exhaled. "I came here to start over. I promised myself I'd keep things clear, professional. But I don't think I'm doing a very good job of it." The honesty in his tone tugged at something deep in me. I wanted to push, to ask if I was the reason he was conflicted, but before I could speak, his smartwatch buzzed. He glanced down, and for a fraction of a second, the screen lit up with a message I couldn't ignore. Call me when you're off. Can't stop thinking about last summer." He dismissed the notification quickly, but not quickly enough. My stomach dropped. He saw my expression and immediately leaned forward. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I asked. His jaw worked, like he was fighting himself. "Someone from before. Someone I should have let go of a long time ago." His voice softened. "I don't want them here, in this part of my life." I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know what to believe, but when his hand settled gently over mine on the blanket, my body answered before my mind could catch up. I didn't move away. The warmth of his palm lingered, grounding me. His thumb brushed my skin, a small, searching gesture. "Is this crossing a line?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't want you to stop." He leaned closer, his other hand grazing my jaw, and for a moment I thought the space between us would finally close. My heart pounded, every nerve alive with the possibility. But the door rattled. We pulled apart instantly. A senior nurse stepped halfway inside, scanning the room. Her eyes flicked from me to Evan, and though she didn't comment, the weight of her glance said more than words. "Evan, they need you upstairs." "Family consult." He straightened, forcing his voice steady. "On my way." Our eyes met one last time, his full apology, mine full of questions, and then he was gone. Hours passed. Evening settled. The sky outside streaked with orange fading to violet. I told myself he wouldn't come back, that maybe it was better if he didn't. But at 9:20, the door eased open. Evan stepped inside quietly, his face drawn from a long shift. "I shouldn't be here this late," he said, his voice tired but intentional. But I didn't want to leave things the way they were. He came closer, stopping at my bedside. His eyes searched mine. "That message you saw, it doesn't mean what it used to. I want to be honest about that. I don't want to keep carrying old mistakes." I wanted to believe him. And when his fingers brushed my wrist again, finding my pulse like before, I let him. I didn't pull away. But before either of us could speak, the door opened wider. Another man stood in the threshold, also in scrubs, taller, older, with a look that mixed weariness and familiarity. His gaze shifted from me to Evan. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "About last summer." Evan froze, his hand still half on mine, half retreating. He looked at the man, then back at me, his face pale with tension. "Daniel," he said quietly, almost breaking on my name. "I need to explain." The other man remained in the doorway, waiting, history written in the lines of his face. And I sat there, my heart racing, realizing that whatever Evan was about to reveal could change everything I thought I knew about him. The silence in that room was suffocating. Evan stood frozen, caught between me and the man in the doorway, like a rope pulled taut in opposite directions. My chest tightened as I looked at them. Two men in the same navy scrubs, but with a weight between them that I couldn't ignore. The stranger's voice cut through the air again, calm but firm. "Evan, you can't keep avoiding this. We need to talk. Now." Evan's jaw clenched. He didn't look at the man. He kept his eyes on me, as if silently asking for permission to handle it, as if my reaction mattered more than anything else. And maybe it did. I swallowed hard. "It's okay," I said, though my voice betrayed me with a crack. "Go." He hesitated, then stepped toward the door. But before leaving, he leaned closer, his words low enough for only me. "Please don't think the worst of me." And then he was gone, following the other man into the hallway. The door clicked shut, and I was left staring at the empty chair beside my bed. My mind was racing. Who was that man? A colleague? An ex? The name in the text message, M, echoed in my head like a warning. Can't stop thinking about last summer. Last summer. I tried not to imagine it, but of course I did. I'd picture them together, whatever history they shared, whatever secrets Evan hadn't yet told me. A sharp pain spread in my chest that had nothing to do with my condition. I didn't know how long they were gone. Minutes felt like hours. The hallway was too quiet, and every set of footsteps that passed without stopping by my door only twisted the knife deeper. When the door finally opened, Evan slipped back in. He looked drained, his shoulders tense, his eyes darker than I'd seen them before. He didn't sit down right away. He stood there, as if unsure if he was even welcome anymore. Who was he? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Evan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "His name is Mark. We worked together at my last hospital." He paused, searching for words. "We were more than colleagues. For a while, I felt my throat tighten. So the message was him." Evan finished, nodding. "He's been reaching out, and I didn't know how to shut it down without causing a scene. But now, here we are." I let out a bitter laugh. "You could have just told me from the start." "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't want to scare you off before I even understood what I was feeling here. With you, the word with you hit me harder than I expected." He finally sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Mark wants me back. He thinks last summer was unfinished business. But I don't." His voice was firm now, certain. "I don't want to go back to who I was then." My pulse quickened, torn between relief and doubt. "And who are you now?" His eyes lifted to meet mine, unwavering. Someone who can't stop thinking about the guy in this room. The weight of his confession settled between us. Part of me wanted to believe every word, to let that warmth wash away my doubt. But the image of Mark in the doorway lingered, sharp and unavoidable. What if he doesn't let go? I asked, my voice low. What if your past keeps following you in here? Then I'll keep choosing differently. Evan said. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I want you to know that, even if I've been clumsy about showing it. I stared at him, searching for the lie, the hesitation, but all I saw was exhaustion and honesty tangled together. His hand rested lightly on the bedrail, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the gravity of it. Before I could answer, a loud commotion erupted down the hall. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. A code was called over the intercom. Evan shot up instantly, all his conflict replaced by duty. I have to go, he said, already at the door. He paused, glanced back at me once more. Please, don't give up on me yet. And then he was gone again, pulled into the chaos of the hospital. The hallway echoed with urgent commands and the squeak of wheels rushing past. I sat there, staring at the space where he had been, my heart pounding with more than just a noise outside. I should have felt angry, betrayed even. Instead, I felt suspended, torn between the fear of being a fool and the pull of something undeniable. Hours later, when the floor had quieted and the night had settled in again, Evan returned. He looked drained, his hair messy, his scrubs wrinkled from the shift. He leaned against the doorframe, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how this looks from your side," he said, "but I want to explain everything. I just need to know you'll listen." I didn't answer right away. My mind screamed at me to protect myself, but my chest betrayed me with its quiet ache to let him in. Finally, I nodded. "Then tell me everything." He stepped inside, closing the door until only a sliver of hallway light remained. He pulled the chair closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes heavy with words he had kept buried too long. And just as he opened his mouth, ready to spill whatever truth he had been carrying, another knock came at the door. Not Mark this time. A different voice, sharp and official. "Nurse Evan, we need you in the administrator's office." Evan froze, his jaw tightening. His eyes flicked to mine, apology written all over them. "Please," he whispered, "don't lose faith in me before I can explain." He stood, his shadow stretching long in the dim light, and disappeared into the hallway once more. And I was left sitting there, staring at the empty chair, knowing that the answers I wanted were still just out of reach, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come. The night after Evan was called to the administrator's office felt endless. I couldn't sleep, not really. I kept rolling over, staring at the chair beside my bed, the place where he'd sat so many times, where his presence had changed the room from sterile white to something alive. Now it felt empty again, and that emptiness gnawed at me. When dawn finally crept through the blinds, I told myself I should let go. It would be easier. Evan's past was clearly complicated, tangled in ways that could hurt me if I leaned too close. Maybe I'd imagined all the little looks, the warmth in his hand when he touched mine. Maybe I'd been foolish. But when the door opened just after sunrise and it was him, I knew none of it had been in my head. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but determined. He shut the door almost fully and moved the chair, sinking down heavily. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Last night, they confronted me about Mark. Apparently, he's been pushing boundaries with more than one staff member, and the administration wanted clarity. I told him the truth, that whatever we were last summer, it's over." I studied him, searching for hesitation, but his voice was steady. "Daniel," he said, his eyes locking on mine, "I don't want to keep carrying pieces of who I was. I don't want my past to keep walking into rooms where I'm trying to start fresh. I want this," he gestured between us, the space charged even in daylight, "to be the first thing I choose because it's real." My throat tightened. "And what if it's messy? What if you're not ready?" His lips pressed together, but he leaned closer. "Then I'll be messy. But I'd rather be honest with you than polished with anyone else." For the first time in days, I let myself breathe fully. The knot in my chest loosened, and I realized how badly I'd wanted to say exactly that. Slowly, I lifted my hand and placed it over his. His fingers closed around mine instantly, like he had been waiting for permission. The warmth between us was undeniable, steadying, like stepping into sunlight after too long in shadow. We sat there in silence, and for once, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like truth. Later that morning, when rounds came and went, he stayed a little longer than he should have. At one point, he stood, adjusting the blankets around me, but his hand lingered on my shoulder, his eyes soft, unguarded. "I don't want you to leave here thinking you imagine what's been happening between us," he said quietly. Because I felt every moment, too. My heart hammered in my chest. "So what now?" Evan smiled faintly, nervous but certain. "Now we take one step at a time. You heal. I figure out how to stop letting old ghosts knock on my door. And maybe we see where this goes once we're not bound by hospital walls." I laughed softly, though my eyes stung with unshed tears. Sounds like a plan. That afternoon, I was cleared for discharge. The paperwork dragged. as it always does, but all I could think about was leaving without the chair beside my bed being filled by him. When the orderly finally wheeled me to the exit, Evan appeared at the doors, off shift now, his scrubs exchanged for a simple gray hoodie. He walked with me out to the curb, hands shoved in his pockets like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. But when I looked up at him, I didn't see hesitation. I saw a choice. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. Then, after a pause, "and let me know when you're ready to see me outside these walls." The driver loaded my bag. I stood for a moment, heart pounding, and then leaned in just close enough that only he could hear me. "I think I'm already ready." His smile then, small, real, filled with relief, was the kind that would stay with me long after I left the hospital behind. As the car pulled away, I looked back through the window. Evan stood there on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, the morning sun catching the edges of his hair. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the unknown ahead of me wasn't something to fear. It was something to step into. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't being hurt. It's letting yourself hope. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about a nurse and patient or about stolen moments in dim hospital light. It was about learning to choose honesty, even when it's messy. About daring to see yourself reflected in someone else's eyes and not looking away. So now I ask you, how many times have you held back from telling the truth about what you feel, afraid of rejection, afraid of complication? And how many times have you wished you'd been braver? If Evan taught me anything, it's that sometimes you don't get to wait until everything is simple. You have to decide in the middle of the mess. And maybe that's where the real beginning is. If this story made you think of your own choices, if it made you feel something, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the stories we hear are the ones that push us to finally write our own.